for Sport, Exercise, and Performance Psychology, APA Division 47, and co-sponsored by the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. I am Julie Wieselmeyer, one of your student reps for the Division 47 Executive Committee, and I'll be moderating the conversation today. Along with Dolores Christensen, your other student rep, we're thrilled to organize this presentation, and even more excited by your interest and enthusiasm as you consider or pursue a career in applied sports psychology. As Veronica mentioned, we will have 3 presenters today, and they'll be presenting for approximately 15 minutes apiece, and we'll allow some time for some Q&A at the conclusion. As your questions arise, please do send those in so we can ensure your question is in the queue. And if for some reason you are unable to stay with us throughout the duration of the presentation, or if you know others that would benefit from this presentation, it will be recorded and we'll post it on the ASP website. It will also be on the YouTube channel. We will be sending an email to both Division 47 and ASP listservs following this presentation, so you have that link. Before we begin our presentation today, I would like to take just a moment to introduce our 3 presenters. We are so privileged to have these sports psychology practitioners with us, and their years of experience is about equal to the number of years that sports psychology has been recognized in America. That's pretty cool. So joining us today, we have Dr. Mark Aoyagi. He is the director of the Sport and Performance Psychology program, graduate program, and the associate professor of the Graduate School of Professional Psychology at the University of Denver. He is also the founder and director of the Center for Performance Excellence, and he was my advisor during my master's program. Also with us, we have Dr. Kate Hayes. She is the director of the Performing Edge in Toronto, specializing in sport and performance psychology. And Kate is really the guru of applying what's considered traditional sports psychology skills to other performance domains. And she works with individuals, groups, teams, and so many different performance areas. Kate has authored 5 books and offers teleconsultation groups, and this is such a great resource for practitioners either in the latter stages of their training or early career professionals looking for supervision. She is also the past president of Division 47. And finally, we have with us Dr. Judy Van Ralt, and she is a professor of psychology at Springfield College. And Judy has published over 90 articles in peer-reviewed journals and presented in 18 countries. Wow, pretty incredible. And I know I've really enjoyed her recent article on the mental health of student athletes, plus rely on her work in terms of looking at ACL rehabilitation. Dr. Van Ralt is a fellow of ASP and APA Division 47. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Mark Aoyagi so we can learn about careers in sports psychology and how to find the right path for your desired career. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Julie. Appreciate the introduction, and as Julie mentioned, she's a graduate of our program, so this could be titled, "So You Want to Be Julie Wieselmeyer." Very, very proud of her, and I'm told that we have over 400 of you out there, so I don't have that many relatives, so I assume most of you are here to hear Judy and Kate, so I'll try and be quick. All right, so I'm to talk a little bit about why sports psychology and what that's all about, and I'll start building off of a little bit of what Julie said, and then I'm sure Kate will go further with this, but I actually consider sports psychology part of performance psychology, so because the title of the presentation is sports psychology, I'm going to speak about coaches and athletes in sport, but in reality I think it's really more about performers and performances. So with that being said, I think that the purpose of sports psychology, why there is a profession of sports psychology, is really to support coaches and athletes in developing knowledge, skills, and abilities for performance excellence. And I have a wordy slide here, which I actually don't like PowerPoint, first of all, and I don't usually put words on my PowerPoint, so this isn't a representative slide for me, but I thought it would be helpful for the audience there, since we're not in person, to have something to take notes off of. And so with this idea of performance excellence, I wanted to define that a little bit because it's not a term that's used super often, although it's becoming more common. And so basically it's just a scientific understanding of the mental and emotional factors that contribute to the development and delivery of skilled athletic performance. And there's a couple of pieces in there that I want to highlight. The first is the scientific understanding. Julie and other folks that have come through our program can attest to my obsession with wanting students to ground all of their work in the theory and the science of sports psychology. So what you'll hear a lot of times in sports psychology, and what I think Judy and Kate will be talking about a little bit later on, is this idea of mental skills. And obviously mental skills are really effective tools and things that we promote within our field. But if you don't have an understanding of when and how, and importantly, when not to use particular skills, then you really can't be as effective as a sports psychology consultant. Another piece of this is that performance excellence is really in the eye of the beholder. So a phrase you'll again hear a lot of times in sports psychology is performance enhancement. And I actually don't like that phrase because a few reasons. Number one, I think that while we're involved in performance enhancement, it's really the coaches and athletes that are doing the performance enhancement. So I think it's a little perhaps heavy-handed for us to claim that term. But more importantly, I think it points in the direction of that performance needs to be getting better in an absolute sense. And while performance excellence has this this notion of getting better, it's really getting better in a way that makes sense for the athlete or the performer. And so that could mean a better performance on the field, but it could also mean having more fun on the field. And so looking at the different ways that performance excellence is important to the people that you're working with, and then working towards that as your end goals is kind of how I look at performance excellence. So in addition to performance or performance enhancement, if you want to look at it that way, concepts like enjoyment, satisfaction, and well-being. And well-being obviously is a broad term that can be split up into different aspects of mental, emotional, physical, spiritual well-being, and also on and off the field. So we'll talk about mental skills for performance excellence on the field, but we'll also talk about mental skills as life skills that are applicable to all different domains of life. So another aspect of why sports psychology I think is really desirable and why a lot of athletes and coaches tend to seek us out is this idea that mental and emotional capacities really make the difference when it matters most. So you'll hear, again, sometimes in sports psychology, people will do this little routine where they'll ask athletes how much of sport is mental. And athletes oftentimes, and coaches especially, will oftentimes report a very high percentage of what they do is mental. And while that's a nice way to illustrate the importance of the mental game, it's really not true. Sports are a physical endeavor, and it takes physical skills in order to perform at sport. But I think what the athletes are getting at and what coaches are getting at when they acknowledge this high percentage of mental skills, and what sports psychology consultants are also getting at, is that when it matters, when the performance is on the field, when the pressure is on, and when you're in a really key performance, then the mental skills and the emotional skills are really what separate those that tend to be successful and successful on a consistent basis from those that maybe just have a one-time great performance or just never have a great performance when the pressure is on or when it matters most to them. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Judy. Thank you. So another aspect here that I want to talk about with sports psychology is a lot of times we talk about training the brain or training the mind. And when we talk about it that way, it sounds like a singular entity, which physically it is. The brain is a singular entity. The mind, we can get into a whole metaphysical discussion about that. But what I want to emphasize is that training the mind or training the brain is really multifaceted. And so specificity is really important. So just like you wouldn't approach an athlete from a physical perspective and say, hey, let's train your body, it's the same with the brain. It's recognizing that there are different aspects to train within the brain and different parts of the brain that do different things. And therefore, that's where the specialty knowledge that we have in sports psychology becomes important, because you're trained to understand those differences, whereas coaches and athletes might understand little bits and pieces of the puzzle, but when the puzzle doesn't come together, they might not be able to add the other pieces that they might need. So I have here 4 examples below to illustrate this point. You see strength, endurance, flexibility, and resilience, and probably for a lot of us, we associate these terms with muscular, right? We might say muscular strength, muscular endurance, muscular flexibility, and muscular resilience. What I want to illustrate here is that these same markers of excellence relate to the mind and the emotions as well. So we could talk about mental strength, we could talk about emotional strength, and on down the list. And again, what happens is that a lot of athletes and coaches have developed a way to build mental strength, for example. We hear about mental toughness all the time, and a lot of times what they mean is mental strength. But do they know how to build mental endurance? Do they know how to build mental flexibility? Do they know how to build resilience? Flexibility is really a key one. I think that's a really important area that not many people put a lot of time into. So with that, I'll conclude my thoughts on this portion, and then Judy and Kate are now going to, well.
So I'll start in. Mark, that's a really wonderful introduction, and I'll pick up on a couple of things that you were describing. One is the whole issue of sports psychology being a part of performance psychology and the ways in which performance is generic. We may come back to that a bit later. Just wanted to underscore that. Also, actually, Judy, if you want to go back to the prior slide before this one. Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that Mark and his colleagues have really worked on at various points have been that whole issue of knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, that are a cluster that I think come from the business world, but really looking at them in terms of performance or sport performance. So I wanted to underscore that. Another piece that seems really relevant to what you're describing is a statement that came out of American Psychological Association in 2005 talking about evidence-based practice in psychology, or EBPP, and the ways in which practice can be most effective if it's based on both the research literature, the practitioner's own knowledge, which obviously comes in part from the research literature but also from practice, and the client's own culture and interests and focus. And that kind of three-legged stool, I think, is so critical to all kinds of performance. Another piece that I wanted to emphasize was the enjoyment, satisfaction, and well-being that Mark was speaking about. And as with many of the things that we're talking about today, everything is connected to everything. And so it might look as if enjoyment is just this thing in and of itself, but actually if you're enjoying what you are doing, then you probably have much more motivation to be doing it. You probably have more self-efficacy, more belief that you can do it, and that's going to increase your likelihood of doing it, and then you get a very nice circle. Other than that, well, I guess the next slide, my additional piece that I think this was a lovely trope that you did, would be another bullet point maybe that has to do with balance. And just as in physical training one needs balance, certainly within sports psychology it is very much about balance and how to be an excellent performer who also incorporates that within one's general life. And with that, I'll turn it to Judy for comment.
Thank you, Kate and Mark, and I think you have done a wonderful job discussing some of the whys of sports psychology. So I thought that I would touch a little bit on where sports psychology comes from and sort of orient us to the general fields of psychology and sports science, sometimes called exercise science, kinesiology, formerly physical education, so I think I'll be using the term exercise science as we speak today. And if we were to look at sports psychology as it relates to the general field of psychology, I would note that sports psychology is a specialty area that often is related to performance, and that the theories and practice from mainstream psychology make up a large part of the work that we do and the approaches that we take. But the boundaries are different, so sports psychology practitioners or people who are working with teams and athletes may do more work with their clients outside of the office than is typical in mainstream psychology. And then as we move to the exercise science side, we again see that sports psychology is a specialty within exercise science. Its theories are related to an array of areas from coaching to exercise physiology to biomechanics, and that those theories are ones that are also considered in the mainstream part of the field. But if we were to look at the people who are practicing, we would see that the boundaries are different, and also that those who work in sports psychology might follow slightly different ethical guidelines than other practitioners such as coaches. So thank you. I'm ready to turn things over to Kate.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what sports psychologists do, and one caveat and a kind of general principle. So the caveat is I'm saying sports psychologists, but I'm really speaking more generically about sports psychology professionals. One of the things that I wanted to mention is kind of a general framework. Again, if you think about what sports psychology professionals do, that part of what is really important is thinking about where you want to go and what you as a professional want to do, and also what the clients who you work with want to do. Some other comments that I have maybe will fit in more around issues of education and training. So in terms of the kinds of activities that sports psychologists do, certainly the piece that is maybe most visible has to do with mental skills for optimal performance. And I broke that down into a couple of different areas. One is the kinds of issues that athletes will come to us around, and one certainly is issues around competitiveness and how a person deals with that, whether functionally or whether they get intimidated by it or whether they overreact. When working with teams, there are a whole lot of issues to deal with around how a team functions best, cohesion, leadership, followership, and so on. Motivation can be tremendously important, especially over time, and focus can also be central. Interestingly, as I was speaking, I gently moved my mouse and it took me off of the slide, and so I was having to both speak and think about, okay, have I just lost absolutely everything, and redirect my focus. So one of the things that I love about sports psychology is that the kinds of principles that we deal with are ones that apply to absolutely everything about how we perform and what we do. There are a number of techniques, kind of classic techniques having to do with tension management, goal setting, imagery, self-talk, all of which ultimately are about how do we best focus. And a lot of the techniques come from the cognitive behavioral literature. More recently, there's a lot that is being incorporated from mindfulness and ACT. What happens, what athletes are working on, of course, does not happen in isolation, and so athletes are people, and some of the time what we're dealing with are everyday issues as well, whether they have to do with some kinds of transitions or changes in the athlete's sport environment, or whether they have to do with more personal matters, whether that's relationships or work or school or life in general. So if I could have the next slide. Thank you. So again, sports psychology professionals work with a wide range of people. I've kind of done it a bit chronologically. If you're working with developmental athletes, these can be kids, adolescents, you need to know a lot about working with.
And there's not much controversy in a situation like that.
I'm getting some feedback from something else.
The stakes are high, and the stakes are high, and people.
Anybody know? Okay. If somebody is on and can mute yourself, that will be great. Thank you. So when you're working with kids, you need to know a lot about child development. You also need to know a lot about sport development and children. High-performance athletes at university or preparing for the Olympics, which occurs in 106 days for any of you who are counting down. This is kind of one of the pinnacle things that people think that they want to work with, just really high-performance athletes. Much wider range, very interesting group. Recreational athletes are adults who are committed to their particular sport, may not be, probably are not in it for the money, but are in it for a variety of other reasons. Another of the pinnacles would be working with professional athletes or teams. Can be very exciting, can also be a very precarious position. Probably if you get to work with a team, you're also likely to be among the first who can get cut for a whole variety of reasons. And then wide variety of possibilities in physical activity, whether with regard to general health, mental health, all of the ways in which physical activity is very important to mental health, or various kinds of rehabilitation due to injury or illness or transitions, retirement, and so on. And if I could have the next slide. So a bit about careers in sports psychology. And there's kind of some classics, if you will. In fact, if you're interested in more detail about this, both at the Division 47 website and the ASP website, there's a lot of information about different kinds of careers in sports psychology. I realized as I was thinking about these slides today and what I was going to say that actually I left off some other kinds of careers that are very much directly involved, and perhaps Judy and Mark will have some additional ones that they'll think of. But in general, teaching, doing research, perhaps within an institution, medical research, being in practice of one kind or another. If one is a college professor, one may be practicing as a consultant outside of the institution as well, or one may be working within the college counseling center, maybe in a rehabilitation institute. Independent practice is a whole other area where one is pretty much on one's own or in a group, and one can also practice with professional or high-performance teams. Kind of related to that, there can be sports medicine or behavioral health care kinds of practice that one does. Right now there's a whole lot of emphasis on collaborative care, and that very much fits within. And then a whole other area that has to do with health promotion, whether as an academic advisor or as a coach or as working within a fitness organization or, again, on one's own. The next slide. So also really exciting is some other areas that have been emerging and stabilized to some extent. So other performance areas, and this comes back to the notion that Mark was talking about initially about working with athletes as being one subset, if you will, of working as somebody who works with performers generically. So working with performing artists, musicians, actors, dancers, that kind of thing, or working in various kinds of high-demand, high-stress environments. That might be with business executives, or working in high-risk occupations. The Army and I think perhaps some other of the military have a program called Comprehensive Soldier Fitness too. It's changed names over time, but they are actually, I believe, the largest employer of people who have graduated in sports psychology, working with people who are in life and death situations as emergency room physicians or surgeons is also a way of looking at the performance information that we've got and how it can be applied in other areas. Neuropsychology is a growing field, particularly with all of the information now on working with traumatic brain injury, and also then one final area would be working in as a life skills professional or a life coach. And I'll now turn this back over to
Judy.
Judy, I think.
Thank you, Kate, and for that comprehensive overview of careers that are available to sports psychology professionals. And I thought I would take a slightly different tack in talking about those issues and talk about the skills that might be valuable for people who want careers to be successful in this area. So I would start by saying that much of this work, whether teaching, research, practice, health promotion, or these non-traditional careers, all are ones that are helping and not glory professions. So if a career for you is one where you're front and center holding up the trophy, that's not as much of a fit. A lot of these are supportive roles where people are a little bit more in the background and helping others. That said, you don't work alone as a sports psychology professional, so if you enjoy meeting and working with others, this may be a fit for you. I mentioned being comfortable in the background, but I also should add comfortable in public speaking. So you may be talking to groups of teams or athletes or teaching classes or working out in front as well. If you are able to maintain confidentiality, that is to keep other people's secrets, that will be helpful as a sports psychology professional in a variety of these careers. It's also valuable if you're a person who can work non-traditional hours. So working in most of these jobs are not 9-to-5 propositions. Athletes and research happens, I won't say round the clock, but certainly not just during the 40-hour work week. If you have skills and interest in research or writing, that would be particularly helpful for the teaching or university careers and obviously for a research career, but it can also be valuable in other settings to evaluate the programs that you're doing and to assess the needs of those that you work with. And then if we talk about career requirements, many of them include travel with the team or in other settings. It might involve learning new teams and new cultures, everything from university to sports teams. Working internationally might be a possibility. So if you're a person who speaks multiple languages, that can be helpful. And then some exposure or interest to research and teaching. All of those are parts of sports psychology careers and skills and interests that might be valuable or a way for you to determine if this type of career is a fit for you. Thank you.
All right, thank you to Kate and for Judy for setting that up. I'll try and maybe just add a little bit of variety here. So I'll start going back to Kate's first slide about techniques. And this is an analogy I use with my students a lot, that you have to be an expert in the techniques. You have to be extremely proficient in the techniques in order to be successful. That being said, the techniques aren't where the value is at for consumers. If you think about this from a marketplace, from a job perspective, is that pretty much anybody these days can go online and figure out, you know, what are the principles for goal setting? Okay, I can do that. What are the principles for imagery? Okay, I can teach that, or do that myself, or teach that to my athletes if they're a coach. Self-talk, same thing. So you have to be very proficient in these skills, but at the same time, the real value in our services comes from that idea that I spoke about earlier, of this theoretical understanding of human performance. And so how do these pieces come together? When, why, and where would you want to do a goal-setting session? Spoiler alert, it's not at the beginning of the season, which is when everybody does it. So you have to think about how, from what those of you that are psychology students are probably familiar with the term theoretical orientation. And so we talk about a theoretical orientation to performance excellence. How do you understand the pieces of science and the pieces of professional practice coming together to provide an overarching understanding of performance excellence, and then how do you use those tools to build towards that rather than just using the tools just because you have them. The analogy I use here is with surgeons, that you certainly want your surgeon to be very skilled at using the scalpel. Probably what you would prefer is that your surgeon can advise you on whether or not surgery is a good idea, and if so, what are the pros and cons of having that surgery. And that's really where that theoretical understanding comes into place. So I don't want my surgeon to just go in slicing me up just because he's really good with a scalpel. And I think that's a lot of the same way that we try and teach our students to approach mental skills, is that just because you have them doesn't mean that you should always teach them. So that theoretical understanding is what's going to guide you in that. A couple other points I'll make. Kate had a great list of different occupations and different ways that people can go with a career in sports psychology. I'm not going to add anything to that list other than to say that really where the world is going is cross-disciplinary collaboration. So recognizing that each of these bullet points and each of these categories aren't a standalone category, that the more that you can cross over in different understandings within these bullet points and or collect professionals around you that can also provide value and add different services, the more successful you're likely to be. Just some pragmatics that people don't often think about. Sports psychology services, for the most part, are what we call a boutique service, meaning that they're not usually viewed as essential, and they're also not usually reimbursable or budgeted for. So reimbursable would be insurance, or budgeted for would be by organizations or people that you might want to seek out as potential clients. So what that means is you have to look for areas where there's either disposable income, so people have disposable income that they're willing to put towards performance excellence or improving their performance or their enjoyment or some aspect of that. So certain sports are going to be more likely to gravitate towards that: golf, tennis. I'm in Denver, so we have things like ice hockey and lacrosse that kind of meet those requirements, gymnastics. And that would be as opposed to things like maybe track and field, soccer, although the way that that's going in the U.S. with the club system is there's more disposable income there, but the game itself doesn't require disposable income. So anyways, just some things to think about there. So geography and marketplace as well. Again, being located in Denver, fun fact, we're the smallest market that has all 4 professional sports, which is indicative of the passion that the community here holds towards sport and performance in general. If I was located in, I'll say Omaha, since that's a popular phrase here in Denver as well, my options for practice wouldn't be probably as wide or as deep. So those are some things to consider. One last point I'll make is that, and I forget now if it was Kate or Judy, I apologize, but someone kind of made reference, I think it was Judy, made reference to being able to present in front of a group. And while I certainly agree with that, and it's certainly true, I also want to add that there's more than one way to do that. There's many ways to do that. And so what I really really want to get at is this myth that you need this magnetic personality or to be an extremely extroverted person in order to be successful in this field. The reality is you don't. You certainly have to work within the personality that you have, whether you're introverted, extroverted, or somewhere in the middle. Ambiverted is what is the term for that. But basically just recognizing yourself and utilizing your personality and your approach to connecting with people. The bottom line in what we know about effectiveness is it all comes down to the relationship, and the relationship is always the largest percentage of successful outcomes. Actually, that's not true. Client motivation and client factors is the largest contributor to successful outcomes, but in terms of what clients bring to the table, building an effective relationship is the most important part of that. And so, for example, if you're an introverted person, a lot of times that means that you can connect with people more deeply, use your listening skills and things like that. So just as an example to illustrate that there's more than one way to be a successful sports psychology consultant, and that there's often this myth that you, again, have to have this charismatic personality or this outgoing personality, and that's not true.
Thank you, Mark, for presenting. And I also wanted to extend a thank you to Julie and Dolores for organizing this presentation. I think some of the information that people might be particularly interested in, if they have stayed with the program this far, is if I have decided to become a sports psychology professional, what is the appropriate educational path for me to follow? And so for the next period of time, I'm going to talk about the education for sports psychology professionals, and I'm going to start at the undergraduate level because I think that's a place where many begin. So for undergraduates, it can be useful or very important to take coursework and decide whether you would want to focus on psychology or exercise science, or possibly focus on both areas. So someone might choose to major in psychology and minor in exercise science, or vice versa, or even double major, so get exposure in both areas. There are a few programs in the country that offer a sports psychology undergraduate major, and if that's available where you are, then great. Although there is some preference for students studying more broadly at the undergraduate level and then specializing as they go on in their graduate studies. So you are certainly not at a disadvantage, or are fine if you study one particular area, then combining sport and exercise or sports psychology as an undergraduate major. In terms of coursework, then, we've covered that, but it is also valuable to get some experience in the real world, and an internship of some kind can be valuable. As an undergraduate, there are often very limited opportunities in sports psychology itself, and so then you might focus on opportunities in one or the other area. So in sport, for example, an internship or an assistant position in a coaching role might be helpful. Maybe working at a summer camp would be a valuable approach. In psychology, working at a mental health institution, also working at a summer camp and in other roles would be ways to gain valuable experience working with people and in sport settings. Research experience, again, is sometimes hard to find in sports psychology specifically, but any research experience can be valuable. Learning how to conduct research, being a part of it, you may find that you can volunteer, you may find a paid position, but gaining research experience as an undergraduate can set you up to be more successful. Also, the combination of coursework, internships, and research can help you to determine if the field is for you, if you're interested in going on further in sports psychology. So those three pieces are a first step, but learning about the field can happen on your own, or additionally, one of the great places to start is by looking at the directory of graduate programs in applied sports psychology. This is a book that lists the graduate programs in applied sports psychology in the English-speaking world, and so not limited to the United States. There are also wonderful graduate programs in English in a number of parts of the world, So at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, in Greece, in the United Kingdom, in Australia. So considering where you might want to study broadly may be useful. The directory includes specific descriptions of graduate study programs, lists faculty members, describes the geographic region where the colleges or university is located, and has some very helpful appendices with information from other graduate students who set out to learn about the field, tips and advice. So that can be a great resource. Also looking at sports psychology journals and books and seeing who the people are who are publishing, noticing where they work or where they have studied can provide you some tips both about what the field is about and also where you might want to go to learn yourself. Websites are another good source of information. The American Psychological Association's website for the Society for Sport, Exercise, and Performance Psychology is located with a shorter URL at apa47.org. The ASP website is appliedsportspsych.org, and an organization called the Sports Psychology Council, which is an organization of sports psychology organizations, has a map of the world and shows where has links to sports psychology organizations around the world. So if you're interested in studying in a particular country or learning about the sports psychology organizations there, the site is available in more than a dozen languages, and you can click on that site and then follow the links from the local or national or international organization to educational resources for students. If you have taken courses, internships, and research in your area and read online, another way to gain information about the field is to attend conferences. APA has a national conference, and the ASP Sports Psychology Organization does, and there are other organizations that also hold sports psychology and sports psychology content-based conferences. In recent years, ASP has been sponsoring regional conferences around the United States, and these conferences are student organized and student run and provide a wonderful resource for students to present their own work, to attend and meet others in the field, hear outstanding keynote speakers, and make connections for a fee that is usually closer to the $30 range and much less than the national conferences, which can have registrations fees into the hundreds of dollars, although the APA conference has lower registration fees for students. So attending a regional conference in your area is a great way to get information. Also talking to students, faculty, networking, participating in webinars, all of those are ways to learn more about the field. As you consider your education, in determining where you want to go, you might want to reflect on the career paths that Kate discussed in more detail earlier in this webinar. So are you interested in becoming a professor or a coach with extra sports psychology knowledge, or a sports psychology professional who has a private practice? And depending on your career goals, that might direct you towards a particular educational path. Are you interested in studying psychology at the graduate level, exercise science, or both fields? And that determination will direct you towards a program. What degree are you interested in earning? Maybe you're interested in starting with a master's degree, and that's enough expense or study for you. You might want to go on to the doctoral level, a PhD or a PsyD, which is a practitioner degree at the doctoral level in psychology, a Doctor of Psychology degree. If psychology is the direction you take, you might want to look into licensure and certification. Also, you may be interested in becoming a certified consultant, certified by the ASP organization, and looking at their website, appliedsportspsych.org, will provide you with information about the requirements to become CC-ASP, both at the master's and doctoral level. So I think if I were to cut to the chase and you were asking me about education for a sports psychology professional, you might ask me which school is the best one. And I would say that the best school for you is one that matches your professional goals. So there is no one best school to receive training to become a sports psychology professional. The best school for you is the one that matches your professional goals. That said, a program that has a good reputation may be a valuable one to consider. That strong reputation is probably related to some of the other things I'm going to talk about now. Faculty scholarship, so faculty who are involved in the field and publish their research are ones who are likely to be knowledgeable about what's going on in the field today. Talking to students and alumni. If the students and alumni are satisfied with their education and their professional goals are similar to yours, then that can be a clue that that school might be a good fit for you. Are there funding possibilities? So education is expensive, and finding a program that meets your professional goals and that you can afford is also valuable. And finally, the location. And while I would say that your graduate education does not take forever, although sometimes it may feel that way, a location that's workable for you and your family is also an important piece. And then finally, once you know your career goals and you found a wonderful program, you might want to know what the people who are deciding about admissions think makes you an excellent candidate. People experience and some of the ways in psychology, in some counseling or people experience role or coaching experience, that's where those internship skills pay off. That can be helpful. Research experience, particularly if you're earning a research-focused degree, is extremely valuable. Strong letters of recommendation really matter. Admissions committees look closely at the letters of recommendation to see that you can do what you say you can do and that people who have worked with you enjoy doing so. A personal statement that matches the program is extremely valuable. It shows that you understand what's involved. You can contact the program and talk to faculty or students to find out more to make sure that your program, that your statement matches the program. Also, there's information in the Directory of Graduate Programs in Applied Sports Psychology for many programs and information on their website. And finally, getting your application materials complete and in on time, including letters of recommendation, which are somewhat out of your control, can really make a difference in being successful in the application process. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Judy. I'm going to try and be succinct because I think we're blowing through our time here, but I'll add a couple of thoughts in terms of the undergraduate education and really throughout your educational process. I certainly agree with Judy that, I mean, you're going into a field that's at the intersection of psychology and sports science, so certainly getting more education in those areas is desirable. That being said, I also think that there's a lot of merit in having a general education as well, and so we've had really successful students come through our program that have been history majors, English majors, yada, yada, yada. So the point is, if you're not in one of those majors and considering this as a path to move forward, it's not a huge deal. Obviously, there's going to be variety depending on the programs that you're applying to. But I think it's really valuable to have a general education because it goes back to that relationship piece that the more stories, the more bits of knowledge that you collect, the more ways you're going to have to connect with people, and the more ultimately that's how you're going to be successful is through those relationships. There's the funny thing about our field, which is that, and this kind of goes back to the techniques and the theory piece that I've been hammering on a little bit here. Julie's heard it for many years now, so she's about to keel over. But the funny thing about our field is that the further along and the more skilled you get in the field, you actually have less answers, but you have better questions. And so the reality is that, to me, a fundamental skill to be successful in our field is to be curious, to have a real curiosity about people and about how pieces come together to form effectiveness. But really focus on finding the right questions as opposed to having the right answers, because that's where a lot of people get tripped up, is thinking that they need to have the right answers, and the reality is that the questions are what's going to guide the people that you work with to find their own answers. some other pieces about applying to graduate schools. One piece, and maybe this is more of a personal thing for me, but be careful about coming across as just being a fan of sport. And again, there's a reason for this in that the people that you're going to be working with are athletes, and you can't be fans of them. You can be fans of them as people, but not fans of them as athletes. And so, again, it comes back to the relationship and not putting the people that you're working with on a pedestal and being able to connect with them on a very human level. In terms of looking at programs, and this is specific to if you're looking for applied programs or programs that are going to train you to be a practicing professional, which I think is the goal here. In addition to Judy's great list, I would add making sure that supervision is available and that the faculty are engaged and interested in providing supervision. That's the professional oversight of the applied work that you'll be doing. It's critical, and Judy and Kate have written a lot about this actually, critical to developing your skills as a practitioner, and something that quite frankly oftentimes isn't accounted for in faculty positions. And so there's a pretty wide variety on programs that offer it and how they offer it and the extent to which faculty are engaged in that. So really important piece of information to find out about. The way to do that, and the last thing that I'll say, is talk to current students and alumni. Judy made a point of this, but I'll add a further reinforcement of it. As faculty and professionals like Kate, we can kind of talk about what we think goes on in the program. The students know the real deal. So definitely talk to students and find out their perspective, and as well as alumni. I'm looking for alumni that might be graduates of programs that you're looking at that are doing the things that you want to do. Thank you.
I'll chime in with a few additional pieces, absolutely underscoring everything that Judy and Mark have said already. One is the whole question of why one would even go to graduate school. And there are a couple of reasons that make a whole lot of sense, aside from wanting to have more knowledge and being curious, which I totally agree with. One is that you actually probably are more likely to make more money. There's some recent research that said on average psychology majors with graduate degrees earn 33% more than psychology majors with only a bachelor's degree. So there's that. Also, probably the more degree you have, the more education you have, the more flexibility you'll have over time in your career, and we all know that things change, and so having more flexibility is a really cool thing. If you are thinking about being a practitioner, you will really want to check some things very carefully before you get too far into grad school. One will be what the school's reputation is in terms of whether it is accredited or not by a body that is going to make a difference to you once you become a professional. Not unrelated to that will be whether it's a school that will get you towards licensure. Again, if that's going to become important to you. People have been really burned by not paying attention to that early on. Supervision or mentored practice, absolutely critical. I had the privilege of hearing Anders Ericsson just last week, whose new book, Peak, is really terrific. He's the person who actually did the research on how to become an expert, and he's the person who came up with the 10,000 hours rule that we are all familiar with. The popularized version of that doesn't point to that it needs to be 10,000 hours of focused and supervised, directed practice. It's not just that one does something repetitively for 10,000 hours. So that's really important. And final thing I wanted to mention is many of the people on this call may well be at an undergraduate or graduate degree level. Some of you may be already out there doing stuff and becoming interested in sports psychology, perhaps as a practitioner. For myself, I was a practicing psychologist before I even discovered that there was a field called sports psychology. That's probably been one of the reasons that I've been really eager to help people who are already practitioners, who are learning about sports psychology, to do that, to learn the research base, the practice base, and become more effective practitioners of sports psychology. Variety of ways you can do that. You can take coursework in graduate programs and undergraduate programs in sports psychology. You can do a fair amount of informal learning, although it would be really good if it's directed. There are some freestanding courses and workshops that you can take as well. Which leaves us a few minutes for general questions. I think turning this back over to Julie. And what is your understanding, Julie, about the kind of time frame that we have available?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you to all three of you. That was just wonderful. I learn something new every time I hear you speak, even though it's been many times. We have had over 100 questions come in, and so we will not be able to get to all of them. We are going to extend our presentation up to 15 minutes longer to at least hit on a few of those. Some of them have been repetitive, so I will try and sum those up and get to the ones I feel are most crucial to this particular presentation. For those that are listening, if we cannot get to your questions, many of them can be answered by your student reps, myself and Dolores Christensen, and you will find our emails both in ASP emails and Division 47. So please feel free to reach out if we're not able to satisfy your questions today. So to kick us off with a question, would one of you be willing to elaborate on the distinction between a sports psychologist and a sports psychology professional? And also, what are the differences in terms of licensure and certification that should be expected? Mark, would you be willing to take that one?
Sure. So I'll give you the pithy answer, which is that a sports psychologist means that you have a license to practice. Well, so it gets complicated really quick, but there's different regulations at the state level, at the national level, and obviously internationally. So it's convoluted and complex, but in general, to call yourself a sports psychologist or to use the title psychologist, you have to be a licensed psychologist or a registered psychologist. So that would be the difference between a person that's a sports psychologist and a sports psychology consultant, and then that leads into the many other derivations of title that we have. So that's kind of the brief way to touch on the first part of the question. In terms of licensures and certifications, it depends on what you mean by that. From upholding the standards of the profession standpoint, then it's certainly, if you want to practice sports psychology, ASP certified consultant status is the most recognized sports psychology certification we have in the United States. There's no licensure in sports psychology, which is a higher level of regulation than a certification is. Again, I'm speaking to the United States specifically. From a pragmatic perspective, for the most part, your clients will have no idea. So it's certainly advisable from a professional perspective to seek out those certifications and licensures. From a purely pragmatic perspective, your success is going to be based on your reputation, not on your degree and not on your title.
Go ahead, Judy.
I just wanted to add, to be licensed as a psychologist, someone would need to complete a doctoral degree in clinical or counseling psychology, a PsyD or a PhD, to become licensed in the United States.
I'll add just a little bit to that. We're also more broadly, I think, talking about licensed professionals, so that there can be licensed mental health counselors who are also practicing sports psychology. They can't call themselves psychologists or sports psychologists, or MSWs and so on. So there are a variety of practice professions that may do this kind of mental skills work. One possible resource for people, I wrote a couple of blogs specifically on this whole question of title, and that's available at the Psychology Today blogosphere focused on my particular blog, which is called The Edge, Peak Performance Psychology. So it's a way in which people can potentially follow up.
Excellent, thank you. Another one of our participants asked if there was be a different path if you were interested in working primarily with professional athletes. And are there ever opportunities to just align yourself with one particular team or even just a university, or do all of you seek opportunities, diverse opportunities for employment?
I'll start that one. I think that's a wonderful long-term goal. And it's also a goal that might change over time. Starting by believing that all you are going to do is focus on one particular professional sport is probably a really dangerous place to start, because what you're going to want to do is to become really good at being a practitioner, and you don't want to fall on your face at your first opportunity, and that's really what would happen. So while that might make sense long term, you want to start by working in a way that is going to be much more protective of you and your learning status.
I would also add there's sort of a assumption hidden in the question, or maybe not. I don't want to speak to this person's question, but the wide world, that the sports psychology professional who works with a professional athlete is somehow at a higher level than someone who works with perhaps developmentally disabled children. And I would emphasize that the skills that are needed as a sports psychology professional to work with novice athletes may be equal to or greater than those at different levels. So the nice thing about working with the broader population of athletes is there are a lot of people who are interested in the field. There are a lot of athletes at the high school or youth developmental level who are really interested in this mental aspect of their game and are committed to or interested in participating. So I would highlight the value of that approach. I make a joke that a great way to be hired by a professional team is to have a family member own the team, and that connection can be valuable. That's a little bit lighthearted, but the foundational idea is probably a good one, and that is networking, connecting, interning, conducting research with the organizations or groups that you want to work with as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student might be a realistic way to get on the path to the type of career you're looking for.
And I'll just quickly add, I think Kate and Judy have done a nice job of debunking some of the myths around the skill level and the prestige that might go with working in professional sport. The piece I'll add is around the financial piece, which is that I've had the privilege of working for a couple of professional organizations, and I'm actually currently studying sports psychology professionals working with professional organizations. And the reality is that while some do make more money working with professional sport, some actually take a pay cut to work in professional sport. And so, you know, you look at player salaries and you think there's so much money, and there is, but the reality is not very much of that is spent on support staff, and a lot of times the attitude is that the support staff should work for little or free because of they can capitalize on the affiliation with the professional team. So just kind of want to debunk that myth as well. Oh, can I say one more thing actually? I'm just going to put out a plug, since I'm assuming we're talking primarily to students and people that are interested in joining the field. And since we're talking about professional sport, that leads to a very specific population. And we don't have a lot of people in our field that match that population. So if you're a person of color, or if you're Spanish speaking, or if you have some of these other characteristics that are unique to professional athletes, we need you in the field, and I would strongly encourage you to continue on your journey.
Great point.
Well, thank you so much. You spoke a little bit about the science of sports psychology and theoretical orientation. We had a number of questions around that. One of our participants asked if you ever feel like you need to select a certain theoretical orientation or a certain type of psychotherapy. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your theoretical orientation, and if you are flexible with that, do you have one that you stick with, or does that change based on what's best for the client or the athlete? Would anybody like to take that one?
I'll start. To my mind, that really goes back to that three-legged stool that I was talking about before, and what Mark was talking about as well in terms of the interaction between the client and the athlete. The more different kinds of theoretical frameworks and tools that you've got, the more you can figure out what's going to be the best match. And I think it can be hugely broad. My training background actually was in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, which I very rarely use when I am working in general, when I'm working with athletes. It was a framework, and there are pieces of it that are useful. The kind of classic mental skills do come out of cognitive behavioral therapy. As I mentioned, increasingly people are making use of all of the rich information that's available from Eastern philosophy through mindfulness and ACT. So I think in the most effective way, one should be eclectic.
So I'll build on that a little bit and say I work from a biopsychosocial model, which includes awareness of biological or physiological factors as well as psychological factors, and also pays a good deal of attention to the context. And in that context could be the individual sport team, the cultural context, the language or background. And so consideration of all of those and not just the psychological approach I found to be very valuable. I haven't found a lot of pressure to espouse one particular approach, but I imagine that if you work in a particular organization or setting, that there may be preferences expressed, and understanding different theoretical approaches and also yourself may be very helpful in addressing those situations where your approach really is an important question or aspect of your work.
So this question invites me onto my soapbox, so I'm going to try and be careful and brief. So in terms of theoretical orientation, what people generally associate with that and what the term is appropriately used for is the theories of personality developed in psychology to understand human behavior. So those are certainly critical to doing sports psychology because athletes are people first. So you need to have a theoretical orientation to human behavior. It's not the same thing as a theoretical orientation to performance excellence. And so a lot of times people just directly take a theory from psychology, so say psychodynamic or CBT or whatever, and apply it directly to performance, and it doesn't necessarily work that way. And obviously this is where you have to have a theoretical understanding and scientific research to underpin what you do. So that being said, personally, I am a mindfulness ACT person, as Kate made reference to, so that's how I understand human behavior, and then I utilize that understanding of human behavior to influence the way that I understand performance excellence.
Just piggyback on that for a moment. What we are, in essence, is translators, that we may have a huge amount of knowledge about particular theory, but our task in working with the people who we work with is to translate that in a language that they are going to be able to understand and make use of.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to try and squeeze in two more questions. This one I'll address to Judy. Is sport and exercise psychology, as the programs and the traditional practice we've been talking about today, the right field for somebody who wants to focus their career on physical activity interventions for those who are generally unhealthy, at risk for diabetes, obesity, or other health concerns?
Thank you for the question, and I think the area of health and exercise psychology is one that may be a really fruitful area for students. There's a lot of interest. There's funding from governments as well as businesses in this area, and where there is funding, there are career opportunities. So I think absolutely yes, but with the caveat that the perfect program for a particular student is one where there are faculty doing research in the area, where there's expertise in the area, and where students and alumni can say that attending this program helped prepare me for a career in that area. And so I think it's a very good track if there's an academic fit with the particular student and program.
Thank you. And Mark, the final question is for you. You gave us the teaser earlier, and we had some participants who wanted to know when is the best time to run a goal-setting session.
Okay. Well, I'll flesh that out. So it goes back to again, the theme here is what's the theory behind what makes goal setting effective? So the reason I gave the pithy beginning of the season thing is because goal setting is primarily utilized to increase motivation, to increase collaboration and understanding around a shared goal, and to redirect or direct the focus and energy of the team. At the beginning of the season, most teams are motivated, more or less on the same page, and more or less focused. So why would you do a goal-setting session then? If the team needs to be redirected or remotivated or refocused, then that might be an effective time to use a goal-setting session. But typically those things, and that's not to say that doing a goal-setting session at the beginning of the season is bad or wrong, just that it's an easy go-to rather than looking at what would really have the biggest impact at that particular time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kate, Judy, and Mark. We really appreciate the knowledge and wisdom that you've shared today, and I trust for the participants they'll take away some very important pieces for how to pursue their desired career path in applied sports psychology. With that, this will be the conclusion of our presentation today. Again, I'll remind you that this presentation will be posted online for future viewing, and if your question was not answered today, do feel free to reach out to myself or to Dolores Christensen, your student reps, and we will do our best to answer your questions. Thanks again.